Hello everyone. Today we'll be discussing a case of a hepatic Hyler block. This was a 45-year-old female who had no comorbidities. She had a pulmonary COX 10 years ago, which was treated adequately, and she had been asymptomatic since then. She had a good performance status, and her only symptoms presenting to us were vague abdominal discomfort and a bit of weight loss. Her examination was unremarkable completely. And when we first did her liver profile, it was also completely within normal limits. But 3 weeks down the line, her bilirubin started going up, the enzymes started going up. And at this point, when we did the tumor marker, that is CA19-9, it was quite raised. So naturally, we did a CT scan. CT scan showed an enhancing lesion in the hilum of the liver and extending to the left hepatic duct, along with intrahepatic biliary radical dilatation on the left side and a little attenuation of the left portal vein in the umbilical fissure. As you can see, this is the thickening at the hilum that is seen, the enhancing lesion. And when we did an MR for this patient, the left system was of course dilated as expected, but the right anterior and posterior ducts were also prominent, indicating that the right system is also getting affected. So the primary confluence, of course, was not visualized, and this gave us the provisional diagnosis of it probably being a perihilar cholangiocarcinoma type 3B. Now, what type 3B is, we'll see later, of course. And these are the axial images that give a better idea of the selective dilatation of the left hepatic ductal system and a slight prominence of the right system. We did a PET scan because the CA19-9 was quite raised, and the PET scan showed a low-grade FDG uptake along the hilum extending to the left hepatic duct, but there was no distant metastasis that was seen. So the surgical plan was to do a standard left hepatectomy with a caudate lobectomy, add an extrahepatic bile duct resection, and do a perihilar and hepatoduodenal ligament lymphadenectomy. And the reconstruction, of course, would be a right-sided Roux-en-Y hepaticojejunostomy. The post-op course was uneventful. He was discharged quite early. And the histopathology showed only chronic inflammation with granulomas. There was no evidence of any malignancy. So this is the part where things start to get a little unexpected, and this is why we are having this presentation. So perihilar biliary obstruction, yes, most commonly it is neoplastic, and perihilar cholangiocarcinoma is the commonest cause. However, there are a lot other entities that can present with the same presentation, including gallbladder cancers, multiple liver metastasis, perihilar lymphadenopathy that can occur in, say, lymphoma or tuberculosis. When we come to inflammatory lesions, we have recurrent pyogenic cholangitis, hepaticolithiasis, and of course, perihilar lymphadenopathy. Autoimmune diseases like primary sclerosing cholangitis and IgG4 cholangiopathy, and ischemic entities like anastomotic strictures or a post-liver transplant stricture. So these are all causes of perihilar biliary obstruction. And though hilar cholangiocarcinoma may be the commonest of it, the presentation can guide to any of these entities. So hepatic hilar block patient that presents without a jaundice or who has a delayed jaundice, he can either have a sclerosing type of perihilar cholangiocarcinoma, or it can be primary sclerosing cholangitis, or it can be due to a pseudostricture due to a vascular compression. It can be an incomplete or segmental biliary obstruction like hepaticolithiasis, and rarely chronic inflammation like tuberculosis can also have a similar kind of a presentation. So when we come to a hilar block, preoperative diagnosis of a hilar cholangiocarcinoma, more than 90% of these present with progressive jaundice, and a combination of CT scan and MRI gives a nearly 96% accuracy. We have tumor markers like CA19-9, but they are unreliable because in 10% of patients, they are not elevated at all. And in a large number of jaundice patients, CA19 may be disproportionately elevated. leading to a false diagnosis. A PET scan is not routinely performed unless you're suspecting a distant metastasis or you're going in for a radical resection and you have a doubt that this patient may have uh, the lymph nodal disease beyond the regional nodes. Now, when we come to preoperative tissue diagnosis, it is not mandatory if the clinical suspicion is strong enough to mandate a surgical intervention. So, you should consider preoperative tissue diagnosis only if you have a diagnostic dilemma, if the presentation is not matching the imaging of the patient, or if you're planning the patient for systemic therapy, patient is unresectable or patient has distant disease, then of course you need a tissue diagnosis prior to starting systemic therapy. So there are various ways of obtaining a tissue sample for histopathology. ERCP with breast cytology is probably the most commonly used and the most simplest way of getting a tissue. The accuracy is only 59% because ERCP inherently finds it difficult to reach the hepatic hilum to get tissue. So then ERCP is complemented by single operator cholangioscopy, which is called spyglass, and it increases the sensitivity to up to 85% and the specificity to 100%. The downside is that it does require specialized setup, requires specialized training, and of course, all the complications that come with ERCP also come with spyglass. So the third alternative is to do a percutaneous transhepatic cholangiography with a breast cytology. The downside is that both sensitivity and specificity are poor in this. And it is a good option if you're planning a concomitant biliary drainage or a stent placement. Again, these interventions would be planned in patients who have an advanced disease or are not coming up for surgical intervention upfront. So to come back to classification of perihilar cholangiocarcinoma, this was the original classification given by Bismuth and Corlett. And as you can see, our patient fell in the type 3B category, where the hilar block extends onto the left hepatic duct. But this classification, the fallacy of it is that it only considers the bile duct involvement. And the chances of patient coming in for surgery do not depend solely on the bile duct involvement. There are various other factors that must be considered. And this is where the Blumgart-Jarnagin classification scores very highly, in that it considers not only the bile duct involvement, but also the vascular involvement, whether it is not there, whether it is ipsilateral side, whether it is contralateral side, and also the hepatic lobar atrophy. So there are specific contraindications to surgery that include presence of bilateral vascular involvement, presence of unilateral vascular and contralateral atrophy, or presence of contralateral bilateral vascular involvement along with atrophy. So T3 disease generally does not come in for surgical intervention. So when you consider surgical management for hilar cholangiocarcinoma, these are the key issues to be taken care of. The first and foremost is the liver function and performance status. A good liver function and a good performance status patient would perform well after surgery. A patient with poor liver function or a poor performance status may not come up for surgery at all. Now, resectability is another criteria where you need to assess the patient and the liver and the tumor as a whole. Then we come to margins, the functional liver remnant status, then the status of preoperative biliary drainage and the vascular reconstruction. So when we assess the biliary extent of the disease, MRCP and percutaneous transhepatic cholangiography are definitely better investigations than a CT scan and an ERCP, because MRCP inherently, it defines the biliary tree very well, and so does PTC as compared to CT and ERCP. However, when we come to the extrahepatic extent of the disease, especially the assessment of blood vessels, assessment of lymph nodes, distant metastasis, and of course, estimation of the liver volumes, this is where an MDCT with a triphasic scan and a multiplanar reconstruction scores very highly. So when we talk of margins, in cholangiocarcinoma, there are 7 margins to be considered. There is the specimen margin, there is the radial margin, there is the proximal and distal margin, and there is the ductal margin and the parenchymal margin. So all of these margins need to be considered when we talk of margins in hilar cholangiocarcinoma. Now, resection status, if it is R0, which means that you have removed all grossly visible and microscopic disease, the margins are negative. That is the goal of doing a resection for hilar cholangiocarcinoma. And the ideal tumor-free margin in hilar cholangiocarcinoma is 5 millimeters. It might be a little difficult to obtain this 5 millimeter margin, especially on the right duct side. However, it has been observed in studies that if the tumor margin is less than 5 millimeters, then the survival is similar to leaving microscopic disease behind, that is an R1 resection. So all efforts must be made to go as high up on the duct as possible so as to have a clear tumor-free margin of 5 millimeters. Now, preoperative biliary drainage is a controversial topic because there have been lots of studies, there have been lots of opinions that all patients must be biliary, must have biliary drainage prior to surgery, which was the initial thought, to now what we have come up to, that very, very selected patients should get biliary drainage. So when used selectively, biliary drainage does reduce the sepsis. Of course, it lowers the jaundice, that is its aim. It improves the liver function and also gives you a preoperative cholangiogram for better staging of the proximal extent of the disease. Of course, preparation of the patient for portal vein embolization does entail performance of a preoperative biliary drainage. Vascular reconstruction. Now, there are specific indications of portal vein resection. It must be remembered that portal vein involvement alone is not a contraindication to surgery. Now, unlike HCC, portal vein involvement in hilar cholangiocarcinoma is transparenchymal, as in it is counted as a local infiltration of the disease and not a spread of the disease. So, isolated portal vein involvement, patient should be still operable as long as you can get the whole tumor out. So, tight adherence of tumor to portal vein is frequently observed during hilar dissection. And that is why Newhouse proposed a no-touch technique where he routinely resected the portal vein in all patients as part of his surgical plan. The outcomes were good, but sadly could not be replicated by a lot of other centers. And when we come to arterial resections, definitely this is where the buck stops. As of now, the survival benefits are not very clear. And while it does increase the resectability rates, whether it translates to survival benefits is not yet clear. So when we consider the issues for surgical management, liver function must be maintained and the performance status should be 0 or 1. Resectability is defined by vascular involvement and lobar atrophy and not just the biliary extent. The margins you have to consider both longitudinal and radial, which includes the parenchymal margin. The FLR should at least be 25% of normal liver. Preoperative biliary drainage should be used very selectively and only to drain the FLR. And when it comes to vascular reconstruction, portal vein, yes, can be resected and reconstructed. Artery, anything outside of a clinical trial setting should not be encouraged at this point in time. So the principles of surgery are: you get an R0 resection, you always combine resection of the caudate lobe along with a liver resection and a bile duct resection and lymphadenectomy. The extent of liver resection depends on the tumor extent along the intrahepatic segmental ducts. And major vascular resection and reconstructions are frequently necessitated for obtaining an R0 status. So this is our algorithm of management of hilar cholangiocarcinoma patients. Most of them do present with jaundice. So frequently they are also stented. They may have cholangitis after stenting. So this is where the stented and non-stented patients differ in their approach, where the stented patients, especially if they have cholangitis, they will need stent exchange or PTBD to be placed prior to going in for a investigation. The cholangitis must be resolved. And then once you have ascertained the extent of disease, you have ascertained the resectability of the patient, that is when you go ahead with an FLR calculation. If it is adequate, you go ahead with augmentation and you go ahead with resection. So to summarize, anecteric presentation of hilar blocks are rare, but yes, these are entities which you must take into account when you have such a patient. Tissue diagnosis is not routinely required in these patients if the clinical suspicion is strong enough. Biliary drainage and FLR augmentation should be used very selectively, not in all cases. The aim of surgical resection is to get an R0 status. And after doing all of this, you must remember that your final diagnosis may still be benign, and the patient must be made aware of this particular problem. That just because it's a benign pathology does not mean that it was an unnecessary surgery, because a lot of these benign pathologies also require a surgical intervention for treatment. Thank you.